All right, this time we have one of my friends on. I'm trying to compete with Mike. So far, I think I've had 3 of mine, and like we've had 90 of his.
I'm just more likable.
I guess so. Anyways, I am excited this week because Jason is one of the biggest idiots to leave Hollywood to do comics. It's like he has some kind of moral compass or something.
Well, Jason Brubaker is a well-known comic book creator. He's the creator of Coffee Table Comics and his long-running saga, SITHRAH.
Yeah.
Is that right? SITHRAH.
Yep.
Which has moral undertones or religious undertones, if you prefer. But this is a good thing because anybody who's familiar with fiction knows that to satisfy the reader, it has to meet certain moral standards. If you write fiction where the bad guy prevails and he's unlikable and he's sadistic, you're not going to get many followers, unless your prose is wildly entertaining, like George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman series. There's a book about it by John Gardner called On Moral Fiction, where he explains that good must be rewarded and evil punished, or the reader will feel cheated. And that's the type of book that Jason writes.
I know you did some comics, I think, in high school. Maybe they were just, whatever. Did you actually sell them in high school like some of us, or were you?
Yeah. I printed up books, and it was an early version of my Phobos book, which I've redone since then.
Yeah.
And I sold it in the local comic shop, and then I actually submitted it to indie publishers, and it got published by it was like Samson Comics back in the day.
Wow.
It got distributed, through Diamond and everything in high school.
Yeah, I'll have to hunt that down because I have the newer version. It's kind of a different, entertaining Tim Burton style retelling of Frankenstein and some other characters like that. And I love the mad scientist angle. And he did it in black and white. Which did you do your original in black and white? I'm assuming probably because of high school and
it was just pen and ink, before. So I never had a color tone palette for anything when I started reworking it. So I used all my lighting techniques and gray values, but every time I try to throw color on anything, it just didn't look right. Plus, it was inspired by the classic black and white 1940s vision type stuff with the grain, the film grain, and the old horror. And so it just felt right to keep it black and white.
Yeah. It is very cool. Were there any major changes that you made?
Well, the first issue, which was 22 pages back in the day, became a 300-page book today.
Right. So small difference.
Small differences.
Yeah. So then how did you get from making the comics in high school to then ending up in Hollywood?
Let's see. I went to San Diego Comic-Con with a portfolio and stood in all the editors' lines, got a whole pile of job offers at that last time that I went. But I also got an agent in Hollywood actually was overlooking a DC editor's line, and he would pull people aside after there was a good interaction with the editor. And so this agent pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I represent storyboards. Would you be interested in moving to Hollywood and doing storyboards? You do great comics." And I thought I didn't know anything about it. So I went home and worked on comic ideas. We planned a road trip, a friend of mine, to just go hit up. It was Ricky Rocket, the drummer of Poison, who had a comic company. We made this pitch for him. And then I was just going to swing by this agency in LA at the same time, and all the interviews and the conversations went great, but this agency just blew my mind. I mean, it was a huge room of people, and they were on the phone with Disney and Warner Brothers while I was walking in. Rates were insane. They were paying like $800 a day back 20 years ago, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
That was like my monthly, salary.
Right.
I don't know. It was insane for a 20-year-old kid. I went home and I was like, this is what I need to do. So I planned to move there, found a friend that I could sleep on their couch. 2 months later, I fixed up my old $400 car as much as I could so it would actually run, drive all the way to LA, and started working in Hollywood, started working on movies and commercials, doing storyboards just right at the age of 20, and became known as like in that agency as their fastest artist because I just wouldn't turn down a job. They're like, you need 100 panels today? Okay, I'll try, and then I would crush through it and they'd be like, wow, you can do it. So I just started working with tons of directors, really got a feel for how Hollywood works, just working in just one place after another, like one day on this job, one day on this job, driving all over, getting lost. Before you had the navigators, you'd have the big Thomas guide and you'd be flipping through maps on the freeway trying to figure out where you're going.
Right, yeah.
So I did that for about 6 years. And then I was really burnt out on storyboards because it's not finished art. I loved finished art, like what comics is.
Right.
And no one ever sees the storyboards. And so I started trying to get into more concept design, and a friend of mine hired me to do a concept design art for his movie. So I'd make these big old beautiful pieces of art for his script, made about 70 of them, started learning Photoshop, started learning coloring, also started working on my own animation on the side, ended up transitioning into animation and freelance stuff that I was just doing, finding the work myself instead of this agency. That eventually transitioned into art directing animation and directing animation for commercials, into working on Kung Fu Panda for DreamWorks. And then I just got pulled into DreamWorks and was there for about 7 years doing visual development. And it was at that time when I was releasing my comics online and getting a following and realizing this is what I really want to do instead of working for someone else. That's kind of the long arc. And then I moved back home. So full circle, I'm back home working on comics again in Idaho.
Yeah. It sounded like you had a decent experience, at least in the beginning of Kung Fu Panda.
The whole DreamWorks experience was the best experience for me. It was like top-notch artists. You're learning every day. They really appreciate what you can bring. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
From McDonald's. Yeah, here, I'll show you mine.
Hey.
Yeah. So the first one I just worked in animation. So I worked on the dream sequence, that really popular dream sequence that kind of blew everyone's mind. And because I was doing that for commercials, so they were like, I hired James Baxter for commercials, and then he saw what I was doing, and then he hired me saying, help us do this, like what you're doing on commercials. So that was a pretty neat experience because James Baxter, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a legend in animation, like the best animator there is. He's like running 5 movies at the same time right now, whatever.
Wow.
He's amazing. So if you just look him up, you'll be like, oh, that guy. So I was brought in then on Kung Fu Panda 2 to do visual development because I liked doing the animation, but I wanted to do the art. That's what I loved.
Right.
So I applied as an artist, and so I got the job on part 2 as an artist, but I also did some of the animation too. So there's some scenes on Kung Fu Panda 2 that I designed the characters in the shadow puppet world, designed the characters, did the visual development for the scene, and then animated it as well. On a $150 million movie, I did everything on certain scenes, which I tell people that, and they're like, no, that's not how movies work. I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you then. The only thing I didn't do on these scenes was the sound design. So I don't know what else to say, because usually it's just a giant crew working on every little piece, and so to actually have scenes that are all you from the start to finish. Kung Fu Panda 3, there was scenes like the intro where they were like, Jason, you do amazing comic stuff. Can you put that comic stuff into these scenes? They're real boring scenes, but we need them really neat. So I did storyboards and then did visual development for the opening scenes to make them just super intense. And then I ended up being the one who would location scout it on the 3D models, and they just followed it to the T, like exactly how I pitched it. And so that was a real rewarding experience too, because it's like, I just came up with this whole sequence that was like the opening of Kung Fu Panda 3, and there's a couple other sequences like that. And so
I haven't seen that yet. I'm going to pick that up.
Yeah, it turned out really good. And I quit. My contract was up in the middle of Kung Fu Panda 3, and I just finished pitching the scene, and it was like, theater, and I'm clicking through my frames that I'm drawing in a big theater, and all the producers are there and all the crew, and everyone's laughing as I'm pitching it. This is like a highlight of my career right there. And then I was like, okay, guys, I'm bowing out, and, and they're like, wait, but don't you want to keep working on this? We'll extend your contract. I'm like, I think I'm leaving LA. So it was a pretty big life change at that point for me. But, I was really convinced that my books, they're my stories. They're my books. And there's a reason I love connecting directly to the fans instead of being one of the billions of names on a movie that participates. It's great to have that experience, and that it's a great learning opportunity. But at the end of the day, that's it's morbid. But I'm like, if I die tomorrow, I'm like not going to be like, wow, I'm so glad I worked on Kung Fu Panda. I would much rather express the ideas and the stuff that I want to express, that I feel like I'm put here to express.
It totally makes sense to me of why that would get tiring, just working on other people's content. I have a feeling, I mean, Mike has done that for years. I mean, I've done it some too, but Mike's done it. But I mean, I know all of us, like if Mike and I, if that's all that we did, there would probably come a time where we walked away too, and we said, "Listen, I have my own ideas and my own things that I need to tell."
And it was 20 years. I worked for other people for 20 years, and I always dreamed about telling my own stories from the beginning. I always had them, but it just never seemed like there was a way to do it. So as soon as things like posting your comics on a website, and people would actually subscribe to it and become ongoing readers, and you could make some money from it, and then raising a bunch of money on Kickstarter and print a book, and then go to the conventions, and the fans are actually saying, I love your storytelling, like all these things just really, really were really powerful for me. And it still is, like I love that so much more. I get so much more reward out of that than going in and clocking in. So
I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to, even consider going back. Last year, I did get I shouldn't say too much. I was kind of going back that direction. And things could have easily gone that direction, but I just was like, you know what? I know as soon as I start a month in, my heart's not going to be into this. I'll be miserable. I'll be like, why did I sign a contract? And instead I just needed to take a break. And so I took a break, and now I'm kind of reset, and I'm like plowing forward again.
Your big transition, well, for from the outside, at least most of us would say, was like Remind. Was that did you make Remind while you were still in Hollywood?
Yeah.
And didn't that get the Zarek grant or whatever? So how did that all work?
Well, Remind was a long journey. I started out trying to learn animation with Remind. So I just thought let's have some cool things like a cat in a robot suit. Cat in a robot suit. Hey, that's cool. He'll be fighting lizards. I just wanted to make something that I could learn to animate with. So I spent about 7 years animating. That's what got me into animation then, because I used that as my reel. And then I kept reworking it, starting to pitch it. Then the producer of Ren and Stimpy told me, this guy named Jim Ballantyne, he loved what I was doing with animation, but he's like, why are you doing this? Like, are you just going to be like the Richard Williams who works for 20 years on a animated personal project, and then it gets ripped out of his hands by a studio because he's desperate to finish it? He's like, I would suggest doing a graphic novel. And I was like, that's what kids, that's a kid thing. I'm a professional artist. I used to do comics when I was a kid.
Right.
But then it really clicked, and I was like, okay, I'm going to convert Remind into a graphic novel. So I restarted the story. I just, rewrote it basically because the animation was more visuals and nothing else. So I spent the next 7 years doing it as a graphic novel then. So it was about a 15-year process from start to finish for Remind. And sure enough, I got the first issues done, and I was putting them online, like on forums, just trying to figure out what do I do with this? Like, I don't know anymore. All I've done was storyboards at the time. So I started posting it online just kind of as a last ditch effort. Like, if anyone reads this who's not my friend or family, then hey, that's good. And sure enough, there was a point when I was getting about 5,000 unique viewers every time I would update a page. And so that was a good audience at the time. And then fans suggested that I launch a Kickstarter, and this is right when Kickstarter opened. I was like, I don't know what that is. So I was applying for the Xeric grant and thinking I'll have to use credit cards, I guess, to print it if I don't get a grant. The Kickstarter went really well. It kind of blew everyone's mind at the time because there was only about $3,000 made at the most for comics at the time, and it made $12,000. So that was like, everyone was like, what? And then the same with the second Kickstarter. I made $107,000, and at that time, very few people had made over $100,000. It was just really exciting because, wow, I've been working 20 years to try to tell my own story, and no one but friends and family would ever read it. And now suddenly there's a bunch of people reading it, and I don't know who any of them are. So I must be doing something right. Well, then I'd go back into work at DreamWorks, and I'd be kind of like, okay, I guess I'll work on this again, So it was this real push and pull of emotions there.
It must have been tiring too at that time.
Yeah. And, we just had a baby too. My ex-wife now was going through postpartum depression. So there was a lot of drama, but it kind of fueled it. I'd get up at like 4:30 in the morning and work on it until 7 before anyone else woke up, so I could fuel my creation before I have to feed kids and take them to school and go to work and come home and, keep the family going. And so it was a lot. There was a lot going on, but I think that fueled it in a way, when your time's ticking away and you have to, the only way you can do it is get up at 4 a.m. to squeeze in 2 hours, suddenly, and you're motivated enough to do that. Like, you can get a lot done with that kind of intensity, because it was like hyper focus for 2 hours. Like, I was crushing through pages faster than I could believe, because this is the only shot I have at doing this, How
many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids.
Yeah, or maybe you always were a morning person. Did you turn into a morning person? Because no.
Yeah, I turned into a morning person. There was a little brief period where I tried to be a day trader before all that happened, and so I got used to getting up early, because it was all East Coast time, and so I had to get up really early.
As far as I'm concerned, the only benefit to living on the West Coast is you can phone people on the East Coast as soon as you get up.
Yeah. I realized I could, and then having kids and losing that sleep and realizing, okay, I can power through this. And I just need to go to bed at 10 or whatever it is, It was really an eye-opening experience to just get up that early and work on stuff. And I tell people that all the time. If you're having trouble getting it done, just get up early, before everyone else does. And I'm proof that you can, even if you're not that personality. When I was younger, I couldn't get up before 10 or 11 or noon. Sometimes. I was like, I don't know life. I mean, I wasn't miserable. I just didn't want to wake up.
Yeah.
I'd go to bed super late. We'd go to Denny's and work all night on drawing stuff at Denny's. That was our student.
No, I asked because Mike is definitely a morning person now, where he'll get up really early and start
complete 180. For the first 40 years of my life, I never went to bed before 1 or 2 in the morning.
But like you said, I mean, it's just, if you really want it, like, you can do it, you can make it happen. I mean, I've told people that I got started writing professionally on my lunch hours, because that's the only time I had, because I had to go into work pretty early, and I had to work pretty late, and that was my only time. And it's like, you can do it if you just, if you really focus on it. A lot of times, even when you're not actually doing it, you're doing other work, your brain's still working on it.
Yeah, your brain's working on it all the time. Yeah. And sometimes we need to be cornered in order to really have that desperation kick in. Like, I'm going to get out of this situation I'm in. And I remember when I was a teenager, before I moved to Hollywood, and I was really trying to get into comics. I lived with my brother, and we were working construction. I'd get up at 4 a.m. to go work construction, long hours, on these camper trailers. And I would come home, I'd be exhausted, and I'd work on comics for 3 hours, like submissions.
Right.
And it was because I was like, I'm not going to do this for a living. I love construction. If I wasn't a comic artist, I would probably be a construction worker. I'm out of high school. I'm like, there's no other option in my mind. Like, I have to put in this time, and so I felt, metaphorically cornered again. Like, if I don't do everything, I'm going to be stuck in a situation that I don't want to be stuck in. People are like, why you complain about, working on movies and commercials and all that stuff? It's like, well, my heart just wasn't into it. It's not my thing. The happiest moment of the day was when I was done and I could go surf or whatever I was doing at the time,
Right. Yeah.
And so it wasn't the job itself. Drawing a Taco Bell commercial didn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
It didn't satisfy my artistic cravings.
I think you started this with SITHRAH, but where you started reusing some characters.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, seeing them as actors or whatever. Well, he'll take the different. That
was my little strategy. And I didn't plan it from the start, but Remind had this cat character that was very iconic and everyone fell in love with him. And so then when I started working on SITHRAH, there was a dog or cat. I hadn't decided at the time, if it would be a dog or a cat. And I just realized, hey, I could just use these characters like actors and they could just play different roles. And so at the end of Remind on the website, I had this little comic where the cat is sitting there on the beach. Yeah. You get the phone call and it's his agent. It's like, hey, I got a role for you. It's not as big as your last one. And he's like, sure, I'll take it. And so I try to always have the cat in all my books now. And now he's the logo of Coffee Table Comics. This logo here.
Do you have a cat?
I don't, but I like animals, I'm more of a dog person, honestly.
I was going to say, I think we had talked about that one time because I'm definitely more of a dog person. And I was like, and yet he has a cat as the logo of his company.
Yeah. Cats are just good. They're good for online too. I mean, you can't, compete with cats online.
Oh yeah. Some of the other things, different points about SITHRAH that some people don't know. I mean, I love it. It's like one of my all-time favorite comics. He kind of did his own spin on a Miyazaki story, even though that was online on Webtoons and still is. Like with the graphic novel and stuff, you kind of treated it almost like a widescreen film or something, like where you use similar color palettes for each spread.
So when I started doing Remind is kind of when I really started realizing, when I look at the comic industry, there was things that I felt like were like I wanted to change. Coming out of the movie industry, I felt like I had a different perspective, because I wasn't just born and raised in comics. Right. And so one of the things that I really liked about movies is, when you're watching a movie, you feel exactly the emotions that are portrayed in that moment that's projected to you. And you pause the screen, it's like, it's not a bunch of different moments. It's one moment and one feeling, one tone. And so I really wanted to do that with comics, where when you have a page open, a spread open, it's all the colors and all the scene is one scene. It's like one scene until you flip the page. I really love the idea also of spreads, just like with magazines, you can really control the flow of the eye all the way across the page instead of pages that could be swapped.
Right.
And so I started making these rules for myself that I felt like I wish other comics would do this, and they were just, for me, it's what I wanted, and I kind of operate that way. Like, I'll make what I would like to see happen, Right. And then another one was hardcover books. There just wasn't a lot of hardcover books when I started in 2009. And
in
so
America.
in America, yeah.
Yeah.
In America, you're right. So I really wanted the European style hardcovers mixed with like the length of a manga,
Right.
mixed with like the American format,
Right.
dimensions. Translated over to SITHRAH as well. I work in spreads, and I try to keep that kind of the mood to be page spread specific. And
Right.
then so I use up a lot of paper, but I love it that way because it treats it more like a work of art instead of
Right.
let me just jam as many panels in here to tell a story as I possibly can. I'm not getting paid a page rate, so I can have a completely blank page and I don't care,
Right. Yeah. Any like writing advice or whatever that you've kind of come across or that you've learned?
I did make a video on the best writing advice I've ever heard. That I think it's still on YouTube, and it's some of it is like,
oh yeah,
write as if your parents are dead. It sounds horrible, but it's just like you got to write in a way to where it's like you're not worried about what other people care,
right?
And when I do that, I'm surprised at how much like my mom and dad love my work.
Right.
If I don't care what they, if they're ever going to read it or not,
right.
Because it's like, it's real honest.
Do you outline?
I do like a bullet point list, and I keep it really, really loose. It's just keyframes, key things that need to happen. And I'll focus on the visuals and the thumbnails. And then usually I'm refining the dialogue very last, after I even colored it, because it's like, I want the mood to come across more than anything. I want to make an audience feel something, and that might be the layout of the page. That might be just cutaways to weird things like birds chirping, or the color palettes that just make you feel warm and happy or tense. I'm really just trying to convey a mood, and then the dialogue plays into that mood even more. So sometimes I'll get done with a page and realize, oh, this is a better opportunity to bring up this subject instead of what I was originally planning. So I guess you would say I'm more of a gardener type writer than an architect, referring to Martin's analogy once. I really love just knowing my characters and falling in love with who they are and the way they think, and then just letting them kind of write themselves. I have a general map of where they need to go, but they can stop at this gas station or that, or get a flat tire on the way. Right. I won't know until I'm like in the story with them. It's like a Miyazaki film. You're just pulling back the curtain and you're stepping into this world, and you don't really know what to expect, right? Yeah. Because that's how it is with life. There's some structure to the acts and all that stuff, but you can throw some curveballs in there too. Sometimes people are like, that's not the good way to do it. Right. Your structure's all over the place. I'm like, this is what I enjoy seeing and reading and consuming. So again, I'm going to make the thing I enjoy.
How long does it take you to start like really kind of feeling and hearing the characters?
I don't know if I've really narrowed that down and pinpointed it, because so much of the stuff I'm working on now is stuff that I've thought about 15 years ago or in high school. Phobos is a good example of, I came up with this in junior high, and I've heard people say never start working on something that you came up with in junior high because you were terrible at writing at that time. So don't. It's like, well, no, now I know all the tricks, and so I can actually refine it and make it into something good. Yeah, of course it was bad in high school. A lot of my characters have been in my head for a long time, and I've been dreaming about them for a long time. So there are some new projects that I've tested my limits on, and I've been hired to do some things. Like I was hired to do Shapes, the graphic novel, for another guy, and I had to write it and illustrate it and color it, and so it was a real. I wasn't sure if I could do it. Just like take a concept and then just blast off with it, and sure enough, I was able to really get into the characters and just fill out this world. And there's some people that seem to like that most out of my other work. Yeah. And I think it was a little too rushed, because it was like taking what I would consider to be 1,000-page story and condensing it into 100 pages. But hey, that's what I was hired to do. So I think now if I could hit the ground running pretty fast if I wanted to, like with a brand new story. If I was really inspired by it, I think I could do it now. Like within a couple of months, be invested in those characters. But I have to just really like spend the time. I got to be in it.
Right.
In it to win it, so to speak. Like full on invested every day, like thinking through these characters for months to really get into their heads. I think I don't like doing that though. I would like to let it slowly percolate,
right,
for years, and then it's more enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say when you were kind of describing some of your writing stuff, and I know too just the way that you communicate through the visuals and the things that are happening. I think to an extent that Mike kind of does that too with a lot of his stuff. Mike is fantastic at dialogue. I mean, most people know that he has his own style. It's very entertaining and extremely clever and everything. But he the thing that I think makes it so powerful is in a lot of his stories, you can tell what's going on if you're only looking at the visuals. Maybe you don't know the exact specifics, but there's certain things like that. And there's certain people in Hollywood in different places that will use that as I know, like, what's his name? I think it's George Miller or whatever that does the Mad Max stuff. Like, when he writes the films, and when he's worked with other people on them, they don't do any dialogue in their first drafts. They're just writing everything visually. And his rationale is, if people don't understand what's going on by the visuals, we need to, we can't just clean that up by the words or whatever that we give them. People need to be able to understand what's happening.
You can do that in a movie because the movie controls pacing.
Right.
But, I think that wordless comics are a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because you can flip through them in 10 minutes or 15 minutes if it's a graphic novel.
Yep.
I like to keep words to a minimum, but give them the maximum impact.
And I'll agree. That was one of the things that I was learning when I was first doing comics too, especially like at that time. Because so many people were writing like tons of like paragraphs in the word balloons at that time, and they were like, man, it's like, just don't cover up all the art. Some of the scenes that with the really, really cool art, like, people stayed on there because of the words I put on that page or the stuff that was there, and it made them linger longer to be able to see it. Because really with the comics, the words are part of the visuals too. Again is another thing I love about your stuff, because you will make your own fonts. You'll do different things creatively that are almost like graphic design in a way, with the way that you work with stuff, which I think is great. And there aren't that many people in comics that do it, but some of the best letterers have done it for years, where they get really creative with stuff. And it's just, if you do it the right way, it's really powerful.
I think of those old American flag comics.
Yeah.
The sound effects were part of the design.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of like the kind of like the old Spirit kind of covers and different things where they put the words in as part of the design or the landscape or whatever. And because a lot of people like say they want something totally new, but then they kind of just want the same old, but then they're not happy when they get the same old. Do you think that there's anything else to the fact of like you're saying about going back and doing stuff that you came up with in high school? Because there's a lot of comic creators, especially with Kickstarter and things like that have been doing that.
There's something about that first love, you can really you can just, if you can fall in love with it when you're making it,
right,
then the audience can fall in love with it, I think.
That's right.
There's always going to be someone who has that same similar first love as you. And so, I'm sure a lot of my audience is my age too, and they can relate to all the influence that I'm drawing from. And I've even been told that someone who picks up my comic for the first time, they're like, this feels like a really established comic that I've known about forever somehow. And I think it's just because I was influenced by the same things as they were influenced by. So it feels like something that they've had forever. Yeah. Even though it's brand new. there's like a nostalgia built into it. And then you also have things like Phobos. There's another kind of nostalgia built into it too, with like pointing back to those old horror TV shows and just all the classic horror characters. So that's built-in nostalgia. So, I'm trying to be respectful to it, but also, have fun with it in my own way. And back when I did it, there wasn't a lot of like these genre blenders, and there wasn't a lot of like, let's take all the characters from this universe and jam them together.
Right. Yeah.
When I was in high school. And so it felt like a new thing at the time. Now it's like, yeah, that's been done a million times, but there's still something there that's really resonates with me. And I'm not doing it because I'm trying to ride on the coattails of anyone else. I'm doing it because that first love was really strong, and I'm still in love with those characters.
Yeah.
And so I think that translates over, because I'm finding that even though Phobos, I haven't released it publicly. It's just been like Kickstarter, and then if people meet me in person or they email me, I'll send them a book, but or school visits or something like that. The people who have it really have responded well to it, like almost better than any of my other books, even though it's not really available. And so I'm kind of excited to start working on the second one and actually making it official, give it an actual ISBN number and put it on Amazon, let people actually buy it.
Switching gears a little bit, his cognitive drawing book of the male body was really, really good. It is such a great way for people to learn how to draw quickly. I really recommend. And now he's going to be doing the female body, but the whole process of that, I guess, like what cognitive drawing is.
But here's the female book cover I've been working on. I also have the male book here.
Wow.
And so it's basically a bunch of worksheets. There we go. Yeah. So, it's
nice.
like there's lessons in it. There's tutorials. This is the first version of it. So and I'm using it to kind of like give myself notes for how to change it, because I'm making a new version.
Right.
But it's basically a 90-day workbook where if you go through this whole thing, you'll memorize all the different body parts from all the different angles, and then you hopefully can just recall it from memory. Like you need to pose this in a certain way. You can kind of recall it, and it's like a real simple technique. It's there's nothing like secret about it. It's like first you look at a reference that you want to draw, and then you just cover it all up. You draw it from memory first, right? And then the next time you uncover a reference and you draw it from reference, and then you draw it from memory again. And it just forces your brain to like connect all these dots. Taught myself how to draw. I didn't have, art teachers that were like, here's how to draw this stuff. And so I was like, I want to learn how to draw like Todd McFarlane. Well, how did he do it? Well, and the thought was, how would I, if Todd McFarlane could sit over my shoulder, not like he's the best at anatomy, but if he could sit over my shoulder and tell me what I'm doing wrong, then that's what I would want. And so I was like, well, let me just rework that. Like, so I'll draw it the way I think is right, and then I'll compare it to his drawing, and then I'll redraw it the way he drew it, and then I'll try to draw it again the way I think it's right. And when I was a kid, in my 18, 19, 20-year-old self, like this changed the speed of how I could learn to draw enormously, just doing that technique. And so, I think that's why I became the fastest artist in the storyboarding agency. So 20 years later, people are like, how do you learn how to, how do you practice? How'd you learn how to draw? And I'd spend time with them, and then they would go away and never do anything. I showed them what to do. And so I'd be like, I'm never going to teach anyone ever again. Right. but then I was like, well, if I can put it into a book and then give the book to someone, if they have the motivation to actually learn to draw, they can do it. They can get the principles from this. They can take whatever they want from it, and I don't have to hold their hand. I'm kind of holding their hand through the book, but then, you can apply this to anything, like any style. And, because really your style comes from just imitating all these other artists.
Do you do life drawing?
I've never done life drawing. And so this is a good example of like, I never had the training. I never went to college. My parents didn't know where to put me in, to help me learn to draw. So this would have been great as a kid to just for my parents to give me and say, hey, you want to learn, from almost like real life. It's not like you're not looking at a model in front of you, but here's the reference. Here's the things to focus on now. It's not just a book of like drawings to where you're like, do I copy it? Do I trace it? Do I just look at it? Do I reference it when I need it? I don't know what to do with this book of anatomy. This is a real tangible, practical thing to just go through this. You don't even have to think about it. I mean, you have to think, while you're doing the exercises, and your brain should be hurting when you're done.
Are there any drawing anatomy books that you would recommend?
Like this is a go-to for me when I was a kid. I love
who's the author of that?
Jack Ham. It's a really old book, but I think it just covered the basics really well. Yeah, and I really, really got a lot out of this when I was growing up, and I'd do cognitive drawing stuff like this, the technique in my book with these kind of drawings. The How to Think When You Draw series, really, really fun stuff. Just a neat series of like fun tutorials of everything. My kids love it too. All the pages were put on like Twitter and stuff. So it's just like a collection of all these tweets of tutorials of random subjects. Right. But he has like 4 books. I think this is the 4th volume.
I mean, technically, you could do life drawing with and it's somewhat similar with what you're saying, especially when you say stuff like that, and you're like, okay, then you do this, then you do that, then you do that. Yeah, it sounds like it takes a while. It really doesn't. It's very fast. Like he's saying, it's actually a really fast way to learn. And for those who are like interested in anime and things like that, I would actually recommend like using that book with anime art that you like.
Exactly.
I would like to talk to some like brain guys that would actually be like, okay, this is why this works so fast.
Early on in cognitive drawing, when I was beta testing it, there was a brain, like a brain scientist who contacted me, who was a fan, and he wrote all these, insane papers and stuff on this research of cognitive learning. And I have an interview with him that I've never released because it's like, I don't know how to use it exactly yet, but it's a long interview with this cognitive scientist who's talking about why cognitive drawing relates to his field and how I've somehow figured out the same concepts. And it really helped inform like things in the book, like what certain things are called. I talk about this thing called the testing effect. And in cognitive learning, that's what they call it, this process of trying something on your own and then testing the results, then trying it on your own, testing the results. That's the fastest way your brain will retain something. And then there's another principle called consolidating your memory, which is basically you do it, you take a break, you sleep on it, and then you come back to it, and your brain has consolidated the memories from the previous day, and then you try it again. So there's things in the book where it's like the last panel is sleep on it, like do it the next day.
That is how our brain works anyways. It consolidates everything that we do.
There's situations like if someone's gone through trauma or police have gone through shootouts and stuff. I don't know how true this is, but this is what I've heard. They're told to write the reports the next day so that their brains can consolidate the memory of the trauma, the traumatic events or whatever was happening. And then they actually have a clearer picture of what was going on. It's part of the book. Repetition is another one too. And so obviously you have to repeat things if you're going to learn it. And so it just gives people those things, those tools, like instead of just saying, hey, draw this, trace it, or whatever it is, like, no, do this little simple thing. Well, let's just focus on the forearm, and doesn't take more than 15 minutes, maybe half an hour max. You've done what needs to happen to really memorize something visually.
And that's one of the things I appreciate about you too, is you're a smart guy, because there's a lot of amateur or semi-pro artists who will just keep making the same mistakes because they're not doing that. They just kind of keep redoing the same thing over and over, and they're just as if they're trying to learn, from themselves, without actually comparing it to other stuff to actually see why do I keep screwing up feet, or you can't just do it yourself because you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Vern Hogarth wrote a bunch of specialty books. One of them was How to Draw the Human Head. Then he did a whole book on the hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hands are.
The thing about Hogarth is he would break everything down mechanically. And he'd point out that the palm was exactly the same length as the middle finger, and that the hand works as a wave like this, see?
Yeah.
And that the thumb hangs off one side as a balance to the pinky. And there's all sorts of that stuff in Hogarth's books.
He's a good one. I had a lot of his stuff when I was a teenager as well.
So
what happened to it?
I've moved so many times that I go through waves of like getting rid of everything.
Right.
Yeah.
There's only a couple of books I hold on to, like my Ninja Turtle, collection and the original Star Wars, sketchbooks and stuff like that. But my library goes and then it expands slowly, and then it goes and then it expands.
Kind of like Oprah Winfrey.
It's kind of like me too. Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
I haven't tracked Oprah Winfrey's expansion. So
do you have a date for when you're doing the Kickstarter for the female drawing?
The last Monday of August is what I'm hoping for. If I can't hit that date, then it'll probably just be pushed into one of the next Mondays.
Yeah.
So I have the female book pretty much done, with the exception of about 15 pages I need to still draw towards the end. And it's a 160-page book, so it's a pretty lengthy book. I've been working on the cover so I can get the Kickstarter video all nice and polished. And get it submitted and approved before the launch date. I am going to have a bunch of early bird slots, mainly reserved for hopefully the people who've bought the last campaigns, who will be notified as soon as it launches, and my patrons and all that stuff. I think I'm shooting for 500 early bird spot, like discounted books, right?
Yeah.
And then it'll be normal price after that. And it'll be the mail book which will be a new edition. And the new edition has a lot of helpful hints. So it's like, it doesn't just have the reference, it has the reference with a lot of sketches and shapes and how to think about it and break it down. And so that was one of the problems with the first edition was, yes, it had good reference, but you need something to be able to look back at and say, and keep referring to, like these like little hints. One thing I like about the how to think when you draw, it's just filled with hints. Blend that into cognitive drawing as well. Brand new female book, and then a second edition of the male book will be launched at the same time. I'll print them both at the same time.
I think the best place to find out what you're up to and when you have things coming out is with the patreon.com/Jason Brubaker.
Yeah, I give them some free stuff too. Like I've been working on this little strange adaptation of Enoch, and so I gave them a PDF, and I try to tell them beforehand what's going on.
I should also mention that Jason also does some music stuff, because Mike and I love music too.
The band?
Technically. No. He named the band after me, unfortunately.
What's it called?
I call my own music acoustic atrophy, because I never play the guitar enough to get good at it, and so I'm always atrophying. And so I was like, well, that's a perfect name. So but I love composing music and writing it and recording it, and that's what I fell in love with. I don't necessarily play in a band, nor could I play with people very good either, just because I don't practice enough. But I can work with other people to make music, Then once I record it, I forget how to play it again.
Yeah, and some of the songs that you've done have been kind of connected to some of your comics too. Things that you were thinking about the characters or whatever.
Yeah, that's been kind of fun. They kind of become a soundtrack, because when you're writing something and you're investing all your time into it for a year or years, you're really in that world. You're possibly bringing your own personal struggles into it, and I do that all the time. Like I just had a revelation, and it's like suddenly I guess my character had that same revelation too, because I'm struggling with what he was struggling with. So when you're writing music at the same time as spending years developing and working on these characters and stories, it's like it just naturally kind of fits. And so it's not necessarily on purpose that some of my songs become a soundtrack of the stories, but it sure does seem to line up more than it doesn't. Yeah.
Well, very cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, or you wanted to let people know you have coming out, or anything? Or
I've been doing a lot of stuff with Macroverse, which is a phone reader.
Right.
They're really into the NFTs, and so I did work with them to make some NFT things last year. I'm pretty proud of the NFTs I've made, and there's some collaborations with some pretty top tier artists too. So we'll see whenever that launches. You can find some of my work on Macroverse as well, like Phobos and Remind, and they're converting SITHRAH over to that platform. The biggest thing I'd want to promote is probably my YouTube channel. If you just look Jason Brubaker up on YouTube, because I do like to live stream. I'm starting to get back into that with friends, bring on other artists and we all draw together and live stream, as well as make little short videos. I put my music videos out on there and stuff like that. I enjoy YouTube. That's the only social media I enjoy now. I kind of consider it kind of social media, not fully. It's more like a video blog.
Yeah, he'll tell me, he's like, I've been too distracted by my phone, so now it's like, don't send me pictures. My phone can't handle pictures anymore. Like I've downgraded to like a 1984. Like
I sympathize, believe me.
And you still send me stuff. Like if I give you an inch, you'll send me a million things. Yeah, and I appreciate it. I love the relationship, but I don't respond to hardly anything because I'm like, I can't live in this fractured world. Yeah, I haven't had a smartphone for about 3 years now, I think, and it's really hard for me to want to go back to one at this point because it's nice to have that freedom. I remember when I moved to LA, I didn't have a cell phone, and my agent was like, "You need to have a pager or something." I was like, "No, I don't want to be contacted whenever you wanted to contact me." And they're like, "How are we going to give you jobs?" I'm like, "I don't care. Call me on my home phone," And so I was super resistant to it back in the day. They finally did give me a pager, but now I'm like reverting back. Everything in my life is reverting back to, back in the day. Like I'm back in Idaho, back drawing comics. I don't want to have a cell phone anymore.
Hey.
Be pre-social media. I don't do social media hardly at all. Let me just say this. I will be speaking at a college in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Just follow my YouTube channel and I'll give you the dates on an updated video there one of these days when I promote it. But it's in about a month and a half. So anyway, if you're in Wyoming, anyone out there, I will be doing a presentation. I'll be doing public speaking, and then also having cognitive drawing workshops there. So yeah,
cool. Well, we'll let you get back to it. And
thank you, sir.
Doing all your stuff.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, you guys.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see you.